Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Hazrat Inayat Khan. The Alchemy of Happiness. The attitude. It is very often the attitude of mind which makes right and wrong. At the same time, it is the attitude of mind which draws friends to one or gives one a repelling influence. Also, it is the attitude of mind which brings happiness or unhappiness. It is true that there is the influence of time. There is a certain time in our life which has an influence for good or bad, for rise or fall, for happiness or unhappiness. Yet it is our attitude which either controls it or is controlled by it. If our attitude is controlled by it, then the situation at that time conquers us. But if our attitude is under control, then there is a chance of conquering the situation. Mostly our failure, our unhappiness, and our disagreements with friends come from a wrong attitude. When a person starts an enterprise and doubts whether he will have success or not, doubts whether his partners in business will help him or not, his attitude will create in that situation all that he imagines. His partners in business will act wrongly and perhaps unjustly towards him, and the situation will follow the attitude. For the attitude is the current which molds the situation. Therefore, however promising a business or a work may be, if our attitude is not right, it must go wrong. It cannot come right. It is a hidden influence, and yet a most powerful influence underlying all circumstances of life. It is the same with our attitude towards our friends. Whether we feel that our friend will prove to be kind and faithful and constant, or whether we think, I doubt if I can hold his friendship. I feel this friend will one day deceive me. I think he will disappoint me one day. In either case, we are creating the thought in the friend, we are inspiring him. And the friend, without knowing it, will act accordingly. In any enterprise or in anything we wish to accomplish, what is most wanted is the right attitude. If a person thinks, everything I touch and everything I do and everywhere I look, it is all wrong, certainly it is wrong, there is no doubt about it. But it is his attitude that is wrong, and therefore whatever he does is wrong. It is just like taking a red lantern and throwing its light upon everything. Every object in that light will appear red, and one will become frightened oneself and see danger everywhere. But the danger is in one's own hand. It is the red lantern. Sometimes a person gets into a wrong attitude out of humbleness. By correcting oneself, one can arrive at correcting too much, and then one calls oneself wrong. With every move such a person then makes, he thinks that he has done something wrong, something dangerous, and that may result in a great danger too. Very often people do not progress in their lives because of their attitude towards life. They are their own enemies, and they themselves are the hindrance to their progress. They might think that one thing or another is the reason. Lack of money, unkindness of friends, lack of acquaintances, 1,000 things. They may say that the planets are against them. But what is most against them is themselves. They cannot progress. Once one has analyzed and understood attitude, and has controlled oneself so as to be able to take any attitude one wishes, then the latent influence in man naturally begins to manifest. There are 3 gifts of God given to some in this world, and these gifts are greater than jewels, gems, wealth, or anything else in the world, and nothing can buy them. One may be born with them, yet not know it. One gift is the influence to progress, another gift is the influence to attract, and the third gift is the influence to make difficult situations easy. Nothing in the world can keep back a soul who has the gift of progress, in other words of flourishing, of prospering. There is a story about a poor man whose job was to sell empty bottles in Bombay. He came to a merchant and asked a certain salary to do this work for him, and from the day the merchant engaged him, he steadily became more prosperous. So one day he thought, I have worked for 20 years in this shop, and it is only since this young man has come that I have prospered. He did not tell this to the young man, but the next day he made him a partner in his business. And from that time he began to flourish 100 times more. After 6 months he was flourishing and prospering in every way, and in the end, as he had no children, he gave his business to this young man, who in time became the wealthiest man in the whole country. This is not a spiritual influence, and yet it is the influence of spirit, there is no doubt about it. It cannot be a material influence, as influence is never material. An influence that works from within and works towards perfection, in whatever form, is a wonderful influence. Whether people like the man in the story act alone or whether they act with someone else, in whatever they do there is progress. It cannot be helped. Whatever they touch flourishes. The effect of the next influence is that a person will never be without friends. If he left the whole of humanity and went to live among lions, tigers, bears, and rhinoceroses, they would be his friends. Let him go among the educated, illiterate, wise, or foolish, wherever this person goes he will attract friends. He will never be alone, in riches, in poverty, in health, in sickness. At all times he will attract friends from every side. This person is born with that gift. Other people may have perhaps 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 relations or friends, but when a person possesses this influence, every man is his friend. Not only human beings, but even animals such as cats, dogs, wolves, or foxes will all come to him. Very often dervishes without 1 penny, wandering here and there, have that influence. And if they sit in a place, in the desert, in a forest, or somewhere in the country, people are attracted to them. Maybe at first after having been away for 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, only the animals of the country know such a man, only the birds recognize him. But then the time comes when human beings begin to come, when they too are attracted. Sometimes people say that a certain place has an attraction because of its beautiful nature, splendid mountains, rivers, seashores, forests. But man has a greater influence than all these places. The Prophet Muhammad was born in Mecca, a place in the hedges of no special interest. There was no industry, there were no gold mines, there was no coal and no oil. Even nature was not beautiful, there was nothing to be had from that country, no art, no science, no literature, there was nothing. There was only a soul which was interesting, a soul which was a magnet and attracted the people of the whole world. And after the Prophet had passed away, then the tomb of the Prophet attracted. It attracted millions. In his lifetime thousands were attracted and after his death millions, to this same spot without any interest. Then there is a third influence, and through this influence, however difficult a situation may be, when a certain person handles it, it becomes easy. For instance, there may be a strike going on of thousands of miners and workmen, and after everyone has tried to make peace without success, one man comes along who has some of that influence given to him by God. It is neither intellect, nor knowledge, nor psychology, but with this influence he goes among them and puts everything right. If one wanted to develop this influence, one could not do it. It is God's gift. A man who has it is called the man of the day. That man may be in politics or in industry or business. It does not matter in what form of activity, the influence is there. But no doubt any of these three great gifts may belong to a person, and yet if his attitude is not right, it is just like a lantern which is burning dimly. It could burn much better if the attitude were right. There are many examples of those who are born with this influence. The gift is there for anyone to see, and yet they never use it. They do not know they possess it. The reason may be that their attitude is wrong. A person may have the greatest opportunities to progress in life and to flourish, and yet in spite of this, and in spite of having all the power to make things easy for himself, he may fail because of his wrong attitude. One might wonder what is meant by the right attitude and how it can be acquired. One can have the right attitude by right thinking and by keeping one's mind focused on what is just and true. Wrong always attracts wrong, and right always attracts right. What is right and what is wrong? What you think to be right at the moment is right for you. And what you think to be wrong at the moment is wrong for you. It does not mean that what another person says is wrong for you is wrong, or that what another person says is right for you is right. The real basis is what you are thinking yourself at the moment. Never for one moment think that those who do wrong believe it to be right. It is not true. They do not believe it. They know it is wrong, and yet they do it out of weakness, lack of power, or lack of discrimination. They are not clear in their minds. There are not many who do wrong thinking that it is right. But the one who thinks that it is right today may tomorrow think that it is wrong. Well then, tomorrow it will be wrong, though it is right today. All one says, does, and thinks comes from an impulse. One end of it is in one's own mind, and the other end is in the mind of God. Therefore, whatever people think about it, whether they think it right or wrong, one end of every impulse is in the heart of God. It is the spark that manifests in the heart of God first. Then it manifests outwardly. One might say, God cannot guide a person wrongly, because God is just and good and perfect. God's justice and goodness and perfection cannot be compared with what we consider just and good and right. It may be that God's justice and what is considered right and perfect by God is thought imperfect and unjust by man, for the horizon of his vision is very narrow. He cannot imagine what God means by every action that takes place. In the Quran it is said that there is not one atom that moves without the command of God. All things are wrong or right, perfect or imperfect from our point of view. But our point of view is a narrow, small, limited point of view. We see and hear according to our eyes and ears. Our ears cannot hear more than they can. Our eyes cannot see farther than they can. If from our limited point of view we judge God's right and wrong, it is the greatest pity. On the other hand, we cannot say that we should let everything happen as it does because everything happens according to God's right point of view. As individuals, we have a certain responsibility towards ourselves and towards others. And since the idea of justice and of what is right is given to us, we are responsible for acting in accordance with that idea. It may be that tomorrow there will be a greater light given to us, so that we shall act still better. And in this way, by acting thus every day, we shall prove a better instrument for the work of God. The secret of life. Man's attitude is the secret of life, for it is upon man's attitude that success and failure depend. Both man's rise and fall depend upon his attitude. By attitude I mean that impulse which is like a battery behind the mechanism of thought. It is not man's thought which is man's attitude, it is something behind man's thought pushing it to the fore, and according to the strength of that impulse the thought becomes realized. Behind every word one speaks, the attitude is the most important factor in bringing what one says to its successful accomplishment. There are three different aspects of this subject which one should observe. One aspect is one's attitude towards oneself. Whether one treats oneself as a friend or as an enemy, whether one is in harmony with oneself or in disharmony. Not everyone is in harmony with himself, and not everyone treats himself as a friend, although he may think so. For man is generally his own enemy. He does not know it, but he proves it in his doings. One reads in the Quran, "Verily, man is foolish and cruel." Foolish because he does not even know his own interest, and cruel because he very often proves to be his own enemy. Apart from cruelty to others, man begins by being cruel to himself, and that cruelty is the cause of foolishness. Man may consider himself very practical and clever, yet he often proves to be his own enemy. As Sadi says, "My cleverness, very often thou provest to be my worst enemy." Worldly cleverness without faith and strength and trust is usually nothing but a delusion. It is the development of trust in the heart, the development of faith, that first gives a man a friendly attitude to himself. And he becomes his own friend by bringing his external being into harmony with his inner being. For it is when the inner being seeks one thing, and the external being does something else, that there is disharmony in the self. When the higher self desires to go one way, and the lower self another way, then there is disharmony, the result of which is like a volcanic eruption. The two parts of his own being which should unite together in love, clash together, and the result is fire. What causes people to commit suicide? What brings illness and depression and despair? Very often the conflict which exists within oneself, and therefore the attitude towards oneself must first be friendly, kindly, and harmonious. Even in spiritual matters one should not go against oneself. I remember that when beginning to get interested in spiritual matters, I once asked my teacher, "Murshid, do you approve of my staying up most of the night for my vigils?" "Whom do you torture?" said my Murshid, "Yourself." "Is God pleased with it?" I had not another word to say. When one thinks about one's dealings with friends, with relatives, with those with whom one comes in contact in everyday life, one will see that one attracts them or repulses them according to one's attitude. Whether a person is in business, in commerce, or in any other walk of life, he either repulses or attracts them, and on that depends his success or failure in life. The secret of magnetism depends on whether one considers oneself to be a friend or an enemy, a stranger. To him who considers everyone else to be a stranger, even a friend is a stranger, while to him who considers everyone else to be a friend, even a stranger is a friend. If one is afraid of someone who may harm one, then one inspires that person to do harm. If one distrusts someone and thinks that one day that person will deceive one, he will certainly be inspired to do so. But if one has trust, the power of that trust may someday turn even an enemy into a friend. Honesty and dishonesty are reflected in the same way in everything one does. If the attitude is not right, then this wrong attitude is reflected upon whatever work one does or whomever one sees, and that person will respond in the same way. Therefore, right and wrongdoing is not only a religious teaching, something forced upon people. It is a scientific and logical truth. For with a wrong attitude nothing right can be accomplished, and with the right attitude nothing can go wrong, even if there are difficulties. There is hidden in our heart a wonderful power. It is a divine power, a sacred power, and it can be developed and cherished by keeping our attitude right. No doubt it is not always easy to keep our attitude right. The influence of this life on earth, so full of changes, of temptations and of falsehood, continually upsets the steadiness of our attitude. Nevertheless, the strength still lies in the steadiness of the attitude, and any lack of steadiness is the cause of every failure and disappointment. There is a Hindustani saying, "A steady attitude secures success," and when we enter the spiritual realm, the same rule applies. It is not the prayer that a man says, it is not the house where he prays, it is not the faith that he claims, it is the attitude that counts in religion. It is just like the ticket one is asked to show at a railway barrier. They do not ask what position one has, what property or what ancestors. No, they say, "Ticket please." And if one has it, one is admitted. That ticket is man's attitude. In order to enter into the spiritual spheres, that right attitude is needed, and it shortens the path. Now the question is how to know the right attitude from the wrong. To know the right attitude from the wrong is as easy as seeing things when the eyes are open. When one does not realize the attitude is wrong, it means that at that time one closes one's eyes. The eyes do not fail one. One closes them. Man does not like to admit his wrong attitude to himself. He is afraid of his own faults. But the man who looks his own error in the eye, the man who criticizes himself, has no time to criticize others. It is that man who will prove to be wise. But human nature is generally such that one does something quite different. Everyone seems to be most interested in criticizing another. If one would criticize oneself, there are endless faults, however saintly or wise one may be. There are no end of faults in a human being. And the consciousness of correcting one's faults, of making oneself better, of taking hold of the right attitude, is the only secret of success, and by it one attains to that goal, which is the object of every soul. According to the Sufi point of view, there is only one teacher, and that teacher is God himself. No man can teach another man. All one can do for another is to give him one's own experience, in order to help him to be successful. For instance, if a person happens to know a road, he can tell another man that it is the road which leads to the place he wishes to find. The work of the spiritual teacher is like the work of Cupid. The work of Cupid is to bring two souls together. And so is the work of the spiritual teacher, to bring together the soul and God. But what is taught to the one who seeks after truth? Nothing is taught. He is only shown how he should learn from God. For no man can ever teach spirituality. It is God alone who teaches it. And how is it learned? When these ears which are open outwardly are closed to the outside world and focused upon the heart within, then instead of hearing all that comes from the outer life, one begins to hear the words within. Thus, if one were to define what meditation is, that also is an attitude. The right attitude towards God. The attitude should first be to seek God within. And, after seeking God within, then to see God outside. In the story of Aladdin in the 1001 Nights, we read that Aladdin went to look for a lantern. That lantern is the divine light within, and it is very difficult to find. Once a person has found that lantern, the next thing is to throw that light on the outer life in order to find God both within and without. Prayer, night vigil, any form of worship, all these things are helpful. But if a man is not inclined to make peace with his brother, to harmonize with his fellow men, to seek to please those around him, then he has not performed his religious duties. For what can a man give to God who is perfect? His goodness? His goodness is very little. His prayers? How many times will he pray? The whole day he spends for himself. If he prays 2 or 3 times, it is not much. If a man can do anything to please God, it is only to please his creatures, to seek their pleasure. There cannot be a better prayer and a greater religion than being conscientious in regard to the feelings of other men, being ready to serve them, to please them in every way, to forgive them, to tolerate them. And if when doing wrong he would realize that he was doing wrong to God, and in doing right that he was doing right to God, then his attitude would be right. The end and the sum total of all mysticism, philosophy, and meditation, of everything one learns and develops, is to be a better servant to humanity. Everything from the beginning to the end in the spiritual path is a training to be able to serve mankind better, and if one does not do it with that intention, one will find in the end that one has accomplished nothing. There are many who seek wonder-working or great power to accomplish things. They may perhaps try and gain some power or other, but their soul will never be satisfied. The true satisfaction of the soul is an honest, humble service to another. If there were 2 people before me, one with great power of wonder-working who could perform miracles, and another humble and kind and gentle and willing to do anything he could for his fellow men, I would prefer this last man. I would say, the first is wonderful, but the other is a sage. The soul of man is goodness itself, if only he begins to love goodness. This is not something which is acquired. It springs up of itself. Right attitude towards God is a direct response to God. For his voice is continually coming as an answer to every call. The ears of the heart should be open and focused on that source whence the voice is coming. When that is done, then the teacher within is found. Then there is continual guidance, and one is guided to the extent that one keeps close to it. Then one needs no other guidance. But first, the guidance of a spiritual teacher is necessary in order to come nearer to it. Attitude forms a channel for an effort, and a right attitude makes a channel for a right effort. The world is the place of tests and trials. If one did not live in the world, one would have no chance of doing good or bad. And even if one lived a very spiritual life in the wilderness, it would do no good to anybody, not even to oneself. For one would not have gone through the tests and trials of the world. One can neither praise the life of a hermit, nor can one condemn it. If he is happy, it is good. Everyone knows his own life, and if he is happy, he will give happiness to others also. Sometimes a man is born to live a hermit's life. In living that life, he will not find any torture or trouble. Let him live it. In that way, he will prove to be his own friend. At the second step he takes, he will be the friend of another. If someone asked me if the hermit's life is ideal, I would say it may be ideal for him, but you need not follow it. Is a hermit's life selfish then? If we observe life, it is very difficult to say who is selfish and who is not. The life of a hermit is not a life for which one should sacrifice everything in order to follow it. I would be the last to recommend it to anyone. But if one followed it for one's own pleasure and found happiness in it, I would not prevent it. For a Sufi maintains from first to last a freedom of the soul. What is wanted in life? If this question were asked of several people, each would perhaps make out a list of not less than 1,000 things that he wanted in life. And yet even after writing them all down, one rarely knows what one really wants. What one apparently wants in life is not what one really wants, for the nature of the outer life is illusion. As soon as one feels that one wants this or that, then the world of illusion will answer, yes, you want me. This is the particular thing you want in life. But when a person thinks he lacks something in life, he only sees the outer lack. He does not find the lack which is within himself. There is no doubt that what we lack most in life is to be tuned with the infinite, and to be in rhythm with the infinite. In other words, to be in rhythm with the conditions of life, and to be in tune with the source of our existence. Our perpetual complaints against all things in life come from our not being in rhythm with the diverse conditions of life that we have to face. And then we think that if these conditions would only change into something that we wish, it would make our life easier. But that is an inexperienced expectation. If we were placed in the very conditions that we had just desired, believing them to be the best, we would not even then say that we were quite satisfied. We would surely find something lacking in that condition also. For with all the errors and mistakes and shortcomings we find in our external life, we see a perfect hand working behind it all. And if we looked at life a little more closely than we generally do, we would certainly find that all the lacks and errors and mistakes and faults add up to something, making life as complete as the wise hand which is working behind it wishes it to be. There is a Persian saying, "The gardener of this garden of the world knows best which plant to rear and which to remove." One might say that this comes close to fatalism, but I do not wish to take you further in that direction. We come now into the sphere of action. No doubt man has it in his power to improve his life's conditions greatly, if only he does not lose patience before a desirable condition is brought about, if his courage has not been exhausted, and if his hope has endured. And now the question is, how can one become at one with the rhythm of life, in other words with the conditions of life? One's condition of life and one's own desire are generally two conflicting things. If desire gives into the condition, then the condition gets the upper hand. And if the condition is mastered, then no doubt desire has the upper hand. But the condition is not always master when there is a conflict, a struggle. Only one needs caution in fighting a condition in life. If harmony can be established peacefully, it is better to avoid battling, though it is a fact that those who complain most about life and those who are most disappointed and troubled with life are the ones who struggle most with life's conditions. Therefore, in achieving at one meant with the conditions of life, one need not always use a weapon. One should first try to harmonize with a particular condition of life. The great heroes who have really fought through life and gained life's victory in the real sense of the word have not been those who have fought against conditions. They made peace with the conditions of life. The secret of the lives of the great Sufis, in whatever part of the world they have been, was that they met conditions, whether favorable or unfavorable, with the aim of becoming at one with the rhythm of life. A desire is sometimes our friend and sometimes our own enemy. Sometimes in unfavorable conditions, desire becomes agitated and loses its patience, and wishes to break the condition. and instead of breaking the conditions, it breaks itself. The great souls have extended their hand first to their worst enemy, because the one who makes his enemy his friend will make a friend of his own self. A condition as bitter as poison will be turned into nectar if we can get into rhythm with that condition, if we can understand it, if we will endure that condition with patience, with courage, with hope. When there is a favorable condition, we are very often afraid that it may pass, but when there is an adverse condition, we do not generally think that it will pass. We think that it will last forever. This comes from fear, from agitation, from the desire to get out of this condition, and thus we lose even hope, the only source that keeps us alive. When we see the nature of life, and how from morning till evening everything changes, why should we not keep the hope that an unfavorable condition will change and turn into a favorable condition? A person gets into the habit of expecting the worst. He who has had some bad experiences in his life always thinks that whatever comes to him will not be good. That nothing good will come to him because he has once gone through bad times. He thinks anybody else can have a better time than he because he is born under an unfavorable star. In the same way, there are many imaginative and intelligent people who day after day read the newspapers and always come to the conclusion that there will be a war. Every insignificant struggle they read about gives them the idea that the world must go to pieces. There are other people interested in astrology who have gone further and are expecting the end of the world year after year, month after month. It gives people a topic to speak about at the dinner table, and at the same time it gives a shock to those who wish to live a little longer than the world's end. Many such threats of the world's destruction have passed, but the prophecy and expectation still remain and will continue. Therefore, the best thing is to go through every condition that life presents with patience, with understanding, with open eyes, and so try to rise above it with every little effort we can make. Tuning ourselves to the infinite is achieved by the way of silence, by the way of meditation, by the way of thinking of something which is beyond and above all things of this mortal world. By giving some moments of our life to the thought of getting in tune with that which is the source and goal of all of us, realizing that in that source alone is the secret of our happiness and peace. The nature of being in tune with the infinite is this. Comparing our soul to a string of an instrument, it is tied at both ends. One is the infinite, and the other is the finite. When a person is conscious all the time of the finite, then he is tuned to the finite, while the one who is conscious of the infinite is tuned to the infinite. Being in tune with the former makes us limited, weak, hopeless, and powerless. But by being in tune with the latter, we obtain the power and strength that will pull us through life, in whatever adverse conditions may arise. The work that a Sufi considers to be his sacred task has nothing to do with any particular creed, nor has it to do with any particular religion. It is only this simple thing: to be in rhythm with life's conditions and to be in tune with the infinite. And when one asks how one can arrive at being in accord with life, instead of being frightened by life's conditions, the answer is by meeting it and observing it keenly, and then by trying to harmonize oneself for the time being with that condition, while the next effort is to rise above it if it is an adverse one. Once a young Arab was sleeping in a field and a serpent happened to crawl over his palm, and in his sleep he held the serpent with all his might. The serpent was helpless and could not bite, but as soon as the young man awoke from his sleep, he was frightened at the sight of a snake in his hand and at once let it go. And when the serpent was out of his hand, the first thing it did was to bite. One can manage a condition better when it is in one's hand than when it has been lost. Then the situation is out of one's hand. For instance, if a person is cross, if he has lost his temper, the natural tendency is to pay him back in the same coin that he deals out. The outcome is a struggle which will culminate in disappointment. But when a person is cross and has lost his temper, then he is the weak one, and that is the time that you can manage him. That is the time that the situation is in your hand, when he is weak and you are strong. In our life in this world, we are dependent on one another, and wealth, however powerful it seems to be, is in the end not so powerful as it appears. Its power is limited, and it does not always take away the dependence of one person upon another. The point is to meet one's condition with understanding and with complete resignation. Thus, the first thing is to meet the condition as it is, and the second is to better the condition. The more one can avoid conflict, the better. At the same time, we cannot always avoid a conflict, and we must not turn our back on it if it comes to us. After all, life is a struggle and we must be ready to struggle. Only, struggle must not make us drunk, so that we lose the way of peace, which is the first thing to consider. We must not be like a boxer who is always looking for another person to box with. Life, a continual battle. Because life means a continual battle, one's success, failure, happiness, or unhappiness mostly depends upon one's knowledge of this battle. Whatever be one's occupation in life, whatever be one's knowledge, if one lacks the knowledge of the battle of life, one lacks the most important knowledge of all. The question arises, of what does this knowledge of life's battle consist? It comprises the knowledge of warfare, how to fight and how to make peace. Human nature very often makes the mistake of taking sides, either the side of war or the side of peace. But if one studies the history of nations and races, one will find that it was this mistake which often caused their failure. There have been times when nations and races have developed in their character the knowledge of peace, for instance people such as the Hindus with their most ancient civilization, but it could not bring them complete satisfaction, as one side of human nature was neglected and misunderstood. War comes from God in the same way that peace comes from God. A fruit has to go through many processes in order to become ripe and sweet. Sunshine and rain are both needed to make the fruit ripe, and that shows that war and peace both have their place. But with our limited understanding, we do not always comprehend the justice of what is done to us. For instance, if a man had lived through all civilizations, he would think very differently from the ordinary man of today, and so it is with God in regard to his knowledge of the entire world. We are too limited to understand. In this present age it seems that the knowledge of warfare has developed, but on the other hand the knowledge of peace is absent, for the full knowledge of warfare is both the knowledge of battle and the knowledge of peace. This can be learned according to the mystics by battling with oneself, and by bringing about peace with one's own soul. The life of an individual being is not very different from the life of the world. An individual person's home is not different from the world. An individual's body and mind and spirit form the whole universe. An individual life can fill the gap between the dawn of creation and the last day. Man does not realize how important is his own life, his self, and the study of his own life and his own self is a study of the greatest importance. A healthy person has waiting at his door several illnesses, several diseases, waiting for the opportunity when they can attack him. A person with wealth has many who wait at his door for the chance to take away from him what he possesses. A person about whom good is said has many awaiting a moment when something bad may be said about him. A person who has power or position, how many are not waiting for the opportunity to pull him down and see him slide down from the place where he stands? And what does this show? Why is it so? One may give 1,000 reasons, and yet no proper reason. The best explanation one can give is that life is a continual battle. The process of creation began like this. According to science, light comes from friction. It is one power against the other power, fighting, and from these two different forces striking upon each other comes an effect, and that effect in reality may be called life. In this lies the secret of both love and hate. One sees in the animal kingdom that the first tendency of the animals is instinctively to fight one another. This tendency becomes modified, and it is its modification and its reduced force that produce in them what we call virtues. As it is said in the Quran that the world was created out of darkness, so wisdom comes out of ignorance. And the best knowledge is not only the knowledge of all that is good and beautiful, all that is harmonious and peaceful, but also the knowledge of the causes that are behind all the conflicts and all the battles one has to face in life. The reason why man generally lacks this knowledge is because when he is faced with a battle he wants to fight, instead of first wanting to learn how to fight. And the one who goes into life's battle without first acquiring the knowledge of warfare loses in the end. But one who learns about this warfare of life, first learns its reason and its causes, becomes more capable of fighting the battle of his life. Christ pointed to the secret when he said, "Resist not evil." This means that if one resists or wants to fight a battle every time something in another person appears wrong or unjust, one will lose one's power. For the competent general is not the one who always attacks. The competent general is the one who stands firm in defense. His success is more secure than the ones who is continually attacking. Very often in everyday life one sees that by losing one's temper with someone who has already lost his, one does not gain anything, but only sets out upon the path of stupidity. He who has enough self-control to stand firm at the moment when the other person is in a temper, wins in the end. It is not he who has spoken 100 words aloud who has won. It is he who has perhaps spoken only one word. For this battle in life, the first thing that is necessary is to keep the army in order. And what is this army? It is one's nervous power. Whatever be one's occupation, profession, walk in life, if one has no control over one's own nerves, one will be unable to control that walk in life. Today people study political economy or various other kinds of economy, but the most essential economy is economizing the forces which make one healthy and strong through life. This army must be drilled and made to work at command. And one will find the proof of this when one can sleep at will, when one can rest and eat and work at will, then that army is really at one's command. The officers of this army are the faculties of the mind. These faculties are 5. The faculty of retaining thought, the faculty of thinking, the faculty of feeling, the faculty of reasoning and judging, and that faculty in man which is the principal one, the faculty of I, or ego. Even in a body with strong nerves, when these 5 faculties which work as the generals of the army are not in working order, not clear, one cannot expect success in life's warfare. One should further study or practice the art of training these generals of the army in one's own body. Even with an army and with competent generals, one must, however, have the knowledge of what one is battling against. For very often man is battling with his own real interest. During the battle it is an intoxication, he is battling, but he does not know where he is going, and at the end of the battle, even if he is victorious, he will find that his victory is a loss. Today there seems to be a great seeking and enthusiasm everywhere. A new kind of urge seems to be aroused in humanity to understand life and truth. A very large number of people are looking for the best way of gaining the power needed to battle through life, and a small number again are looking for some way of bringing peace to themselves and to others. But both of these in their pursuit lack that balance which can only be brought about by understanding, by studying, and by practicing the knowledge of war and peace together. Without knowing about war, one cannot thoroughly know about peace. Without understanding peace, one cannot thoroughly know about war. What is necessary at the present time is the study of life in general, and that means the knowledge of such questions as what is the purpose of life, what is really beneficial, what is nature, and where is the goal. It is no use practicing something before studying it. What does worldly wise mean? It means expert in this warfare of life, to know how to battle, how to make peace, why to battle, and what aim is accomplished by peace. But it should be clearly understood that the battle with oneself means peace, and the battle with another war. If a person has not practiced this on himself, he cannot be competent to battle with others. When one discovers what is the secret behind this creation, one finds that out of one life, the origin and the goal of all, this life of variety has come. That is why the nature of the life from which this world of variety has come is peace, and the nature of this life of variety is war. One can neither be without war nor without peace. One might say that all war in life should end, but this has no meaning. One might just as well say that the world of variety should not exist. Where there is plurality there must be conflict, and although conflict seems a tragedy, the true tragedy is ignorance. Instead of wanting to end the battle of life, or instead of opposing peace, one should gather knowledge of life, and thereby attain to the wisdom which is life's purpose. In this continual battle of life, the one who stands firm through it all comes out of it victorious in the end. Even with all power and understanding, if one gives up through lack of hope and courage, one has failed. What brings bad luck in this life, in this battle, is a pessimistic attitude, and what helps man to conquer in the battle of life, however difficult, is an optimistic attitude. There are some in this world who look at life with a pessimistic view, thinking that it is clever to see the dark side of things. To some extent it is beneficial to see the difficult side also, but the psychological law is such that once the spirit is impressed with the difficulty of the situation, it loses its hope and courage. Once a person asked me if I looked at life with a pessimistic attitude or if I was an optimist. I said, an optimist with open eyes. Optimism is good as long as the eyes are open, but once the eyes are closed, then optimism can be dangerous. And this battle drill is necessary. And that drill is the control over one's physical organs and over the faculties of mind. For if one is not prepared for this battle, however courageous and optimistic one may be, one cannot succeed. Another thing is to know something about this warfare, to know when to retreat and when to advance. If one does not know how to retreat and wishes always to advance, one will continually be in danger and become a victim of life's battle. There are many people who in the intoxication of life's battle go on battling, go on fighting. In the end they will meet with failure. Young people, strong and hopeful, who have had fewer difficulties, may think of nothing else but battling against all that stands in their way. They do not know that it is not always wise to advance. What is necessary is first to fortify the position and then to advance. One can see the same thing in friendship, in business, or in one's profession. A person who does not understand the secret of the law of warfare cannot succeed. Besides, one must protect one's own on all sides. Very often what one does in the intoxication of the battle is to go on and on without protecting what belongs to one. How many people in the courts and in law cases, for perhaps a very little thing, go on spending and spending money. In the end the loss is greater than the success. Again, how many in this world will perhaps lose more than they gain only because of their fancy or pride? There are times when one must give in, there are times when one must relax things somewhat, and there are times when one must hold fast the reins of life. There are moments when one must be persistent, and there are moments when one must be easy. Life is such an intoxication that although everybody thinks that he is working in his own interest, hardly one among thousands is really doing so. And the reason is that people become so absorbed in what they are trying to get that they become intoxicated by it, and they lose the track that leads to real success. Very often people, in order to get one particular benefit, sacrifice many other benefits because they do not think of them. The thing to do is to look all around, not only in one direction. It is easy to be powerful, it is easy to be good, but it is difficult to be wise, and it is the wise who are truly victorious in life. The success of those who possess power or of those who perhaps have goodness has its limitations. One would be surprised if one knew how many people bring about their failures themselves. There is hardly one person in 100 who really works for his true advantage, although everyone thinks that he does. The nature of life is elusive. Under a gain a loss is hidden, under a loss a gain is hidden, and living in this life of illusion, it is very difficult for man to realize what is really good for him. Even with a wise person, much of his wisdom is demanded by life and by its battle. One cannot be gentle enough, one cannot be sufficiently kind. The more one gives to life, the more life asks of one. There again is a battle. No doubt the wise gain most in the end, although they have many apparent losses. Where ordinary people will not give in, the wise will give in 100 times. This shows that their success is very often hidden in apparent failure. But when one compares the success of the wise with that of ordinary people, the success of the wise is much greater. In this battle a battery is needed. And that battery is the power of will. In this battle of life arms are needed. And these arms are the thoughts and actions which work psychologically towards success. For instance, a person says to himself every morning, "Everybody is against me, nobody likes me, everything is wrong, everywhere is injustice, all is failure for me, there is no hope." When he goes out he takes that influence with him. Before he arrives anywhere, at his business, profession, or whatever he does, he has sent his influence before him, and he meets with all wrongs and all failure. Nothing seems worthwhile, there is coldness everywhere. And there is another person who knows what human nature is, who knows that one has to meet with selfishness and inconsideration everywhere. But what does he think of it all? He thinks it is like a lot of drunken people. He thinks they are all falling upon each other, fighting each other, offending each other, and naturally a sober person who is thoughtful will not trouble with those who are drunk. He will help them, but he will not take seriously what they say or do. In this world of drunkenness, a person who is drunk naturally has to fight more than he who is sober, for the latter will always avoid it. He will tolerate, he will give in, he will understand, for he knows that the others are drunk, and he cannot expect better from them. Besides this, the wise know a secret, and that secret is that human nature is imitative. For instance, a proud person will always revive the tendency of pride in his surroundings. Before a humble person, even a proud man will become humble, for the humble one revivifies the humbleness in him. From this one can see that in life's battle one can fight the proud with pride, but also with humility, and sometimes gain by it. From the point of view of the wise, human nature is childish. If one stands in the crowd and looks at it as a spectator, one will see a lot of children playing together. They are playing and they are fighting, and they are snatching things out of each other's hands, and they are bothering about very unimportant things. One finds their thoughts small and unimportant, and so is their pursuit through life. And the reason for life's battle is often very small when it is looked at in the light of wisdom. This shows that the knowledge of life does not always come by battling. It comes by throwing light upon it. He is not a warrior who becomes impatient immediately, who loses his temper suddenly, who has no control over his impulses, who is ready to give up hope and courage. The true warrior is he who can endure, who has a great capacity for tolerance, who has depth enough in his heart to assimilate all things, whose mind reaches far enough to understand all things, whose very desire is to understand others and to help them understand. One may ask, how can one distinguish between the wisdom of the warrior and his lack of courage in the battle of life? Everything is distinguished by its result. There is a well-known saying in English that all is well that ends well. If at the end of the battle the one who was apparently defeated is really conquered, doubtless it was through wisdom and not through lack of courage. Very often apparent courage leads to nothing but disappointment in the end. Bravery is one thing, the knowledge of warfare is another. The one who is brave is not always victorious. The one who is victorious knows and understands. He knows the law of life. What is sensitiveness? Sensitiveness is life itself. And as life has both its good and evil sides, so has sensitiveness. If one expects to have all life's experiences, these will have to come through sensitiveness. However, sensitiveness must be kept in order if one wants to know, understand, and appreciate all that is beautiful, and not to attract all the depression, sorrows, sadness, and woes of the earth. Once a person has become so sensitive as to be offended with everybody, feeling that everybody is against him, trying to wrong him, he is abusing his sensitiveness. He must be wise as well as sensitive. He must realize before being sensitive that in this world he is among children, among drunken men. And he should take everything, wherever it comes from, as he would take the actions of children and drunken people. Then sensitiveness can be beneficial. If together with sensitiveness one has not developed one's willpower, it is certainly dangerous. No one can be spiritually developed without being sensitive. There is no doubt that sensitiveness is a human development. But if it is not used rightly, it has a great many disadvantages. A sensitive person can lose courage and hope much sooner than another. A sensitive person can make friends quickly, but he can abandon his friends quickly too. A sensitive person is ready to take offense and ready to take everything to heart, and life can become unbearable for him. Yet if a person is not sensitive, he is not fully alive. Therefore one should be sensitive, but not exaggeratedly so. The abuse of sensitiveness means yielding to every impression and every impulse that attacks one. There must be a balance between sensitiveness and willpower. Willpower should enable one to endure all influences, all conditions, all attacks that one meets from morning till night. And sensitiveness should enable one to feel life, to appreciate it, and to live in the beauty of life. It is true that by the cultivation of willpower one sometimes persuades oneself wrongly. There is that danger, but there is danger in everything. There is even danger in being healthy, but that does not mean that one must be ill. One must acquire balance between power and wisdom. If power is working without the light of wisdom behind it, it will always fail, because power will prove to be blind in the end. What is the use of the wise person who has no power of action, no power of thought? This shows that wisdom directs, but that one accomplishes by power. That is why both are necessary for the battle of life. What is most advisable in life is to be sensitive enough to feel life and its beauty, and to appreciate it, but at the same time to consider that one's soul is divine, and that all else is foreign to it, that all things that belong to the earth are foreign to one's soul. They should not touch one's soul. When objects come before the eyes, they come into the vision of the eyes. When they are gone, the eyes are clear. Therefore one's mind should retain nothing but beauty, all that is beautiful. For one can search for God in His beauty, all else should be forgotten. And by practicing this every day, forgetting all that is disagreeable, that is ugly, and remembering only what is beautiful and gives happiness, one will attract to oneself all the happiness that is in store. The struggle of life. No one can deny the fact that life in the world is one continual struggle. The one who does not know the struggle of life is either an immature soul or a soul who has risen above the life of this world. The object of a human being in this world is to attain to the perfection of humanity, and therefore it is necessary that man should go through what we call the struggle of life. As long as an infant is innocent, he is happy. He knows nothing of the struggle of life. The late Nizam of Hyderabad, who was also a great mystic, wrote, "What were those days when my eyes had not seen sorrow? My heart had no desire and life had no misery." This is the first stage. From thence we come to the maturity of the intelligence, and then we see that no one can be trusted, neither the friend nor the relation. None can stand the test when it comes, all are false and none is true. And at first a person believes that this is directed specially against him. A dervish once wrote these lines on the wall of the mosque where he had spent the night: "The world believes in the ideal of God, yet knows not whether he is friend or foe. The waves of the sea go up and down. The atom believes that they rise and fall for it. It thinks, the wave raises me, so it is favorable to me, or it lowers me, so it is unfavorable." In the same way, man thinks a friend is favorable or unfavorable to him, but then he realizes that this is the nature of the world. In all of us there is the nafs, the ego, and every ego fights against the others. There is a sword in every hand, both in that of the friend and in that of the enemy. The friend kisses before he strikes. There is no other difference. And then he realizes that nothing else can be expected of the world. The great Indian poet Tulsidas has said, "Everyone does and says as much as he has understood." Why should a man blame another for what he cannot understand? If he has no more understanding, from whence can the poor man borrow it? Then a person begins to realize that whatever comes he should take it calmly. If an insult comes he takes it calmly. If a good word comes he accepts it with thanks. If a bad word comes he takes that quietly. If it is a bad word he is only thankful that it is not a blow. If it is a blow he is thankful that it is not worse. He is ready to give his time and his services to all, to the deserving and the undeserving alike, for he sees in all the manifestation of God. He sees God in every form, in the highest, in the lowest, in the most beautiful, in the most worthless. The Sufi says that if God is separate from the universe, he would rather worship a God who can be seen, who can be heard, who can be tasted, who can be felt by the heart and perceived by the soul. He worships the God who is before him. He sees the God who is in everything. Christ said, "I and the Father are one." That does not mean that Christ laid claim to godhood for his own person. It is what the dervishes call Hamanast, which means all is he and he is all. There is not an atom in the universe that he is not. We must recognize him. We must respect him in every face, even in the face of our enemy, of the most worthless. Knowing that all is God by reading a few books on philosophy is not enough. Our pity and our spirituality are valueless if we do only this. To read a religious book and feel pious is not enough. To go to some religious place and be pleased that we are religious is not enough. To give to charity and be conceited, believing that we have done something great, is not enough. We must give our services and our time to the deserving and undeserving alike, and we must be thankful to God that He has enabled us to give. For this is the only opportunity we have of giving. This life is short, and we shall never have the same opportunity to give, to serve, to do something for others. In the Sermon on the Mount it is said, "Whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also." Someone may say or think that he should hit back, but a Sufi would not hit back. Why? Because he does not want 20 blows instead of one. It is said that if a man asks you for your coat, you should give him your cloak also. Why? Because neither the cloak nor the coat are yours. If someone thinks, "This is mine, I should keep it, I should guard it," he will always be watching his goods. If they are yours, whose were they before? Whose will they be after you? Someone will take them after you, and all that you value so much will be in the hands of others. Then it is said that if someone asks you to go with him 1 mile, you should go with him 2 miles. That means, if someone makes use of our services, let us not think, "Why should I, such an important person, serve another, give my time to another?" Let us give our services more liberally than we are asked to do. Let us give service, give our time, but when the time for receiving comes, do not let us expect to receive anything. Let us not expect our friend to be as we are to him. That will never be possible. We must then practice renunciation. We must practice virtue because we like it, do good because we like to do it and not for any return. Expect no kindness or appreciation. If we do, it will become a trade. This is the right way for the world in general, and the only way of becoming happy. Its moral is called the moral of renunciation. There are two different attitudes that people adopt while going through this struggle of life. One struggles along bravely through life, the other becomes disappointed, heartbroken, before arriving at his destination. As soon as a man loses the courage to go through the struggle of life, the burden of the whole world falls upon his head. But he who goes on struggling through life, he alone makes his way. The one whose patience is exhausted, the one who has fallen in this struggle, is trodden upon by those who walk through life. Even bravery and courage are not sufficient to go through the struggle of life. There is something else which must be studied and understood. One must study the nature of life. One must understand the psychology of this struggle. In order to understand this struggle, one must see that there are three sides to it: struggle with oneself, struggle with others, and struggle with circumstances. One person may be capable of struggling with himself, but that is not sufficient. Another is able to struggle with others, but even that is not sufficient. A third person may answer the demands of circumstance, but this is not enough either. What is needed is that all three should be studied and learned, and one must be able to manage the struggle in all three directions. And now the question is, where should one begin and where should one end? Generally one starts by struggling with others, and then one struggles all through life, and never finishes. The one who is somewhat wiser struggles with conditions, and perhaps he accomplishes things a little better. But the one who struggles with himself first is the wisest, for once he has struggled with himself, which is the most difficult struggle, the other struggles will become easy for him. Struggling with oneself is like singing without an accompaniment. Struggling with others is the definition of war. Struggling with oneself is the definition of peace. In the beginning, outwardly, it might seem that it is cruel to have to struggle with oneself, especially when one is in the right. But the one who has penetrated deeper into life will find that the struggle with oneself is the most profitable in the end. What is the nature of the struggle with oneself? It has three aspects. The first is to make one's thought, speech, and action answer the demands of one's own ideal, while at the same time giving expression to all the impulses and desires which belong to one's natural being. The next aspect of the struggle with oneself is to fit in with others, with their various ideas and demands. For this a man has to make himself as narrow or as wide as the place that one asks him to fill, which is a delicate matter, difficult for all to comprehend and to practice. And the third aspect of the struggle with oneself is to give accommodation to others in one's own life, in one's own heart, large or small as the demand may be. When we consider the question of the struggle with others, there are also three things to think about, of which the first is to control and govern people and activities which happen to be our duty, our responsibility. Another aspect is how to allow ourselves to be used by others in various situations in life, to know to what extent one should allow others to make use of our time, our energy, our work, or our patience, and where to draw the line. And the third aspect is to fit in with the standards and conceptions of different personalities who are at various stages of evolution. Regarding the third aspect of this struggle, there are conditions which can be avoided, and there are conditions which cannot be helped, before which one is helpless. And again there are conditions that could be avoided, and yet one does not find in oneself the capability, the power, or the means to change the condition. If one studies these questions of life, and meditates in order that inspiration and light may fall on them, so that one may understand how to struggle through life, one certainly will find help and arrive at a stage where one finds life easier. The Sufi looks upon the struggle as unavoidable, as a struggle through which he has to go. He sees from his mystical point of view that the more he takes notice of the struggle, the more the struggle will expand, and the less he makes of it, the better he will be able to pass through it. When he looks at the world, what does he see? He sees everybody with his hands before his eyes, looking only at his own struggles, which are as big as his own palm. He thinks, shall I also sit down like this and look at my struggles? That will not answer the question. His work, therefore, is to engage in the struggle of others, to console them, to strengthen them, to give them a hand, and through that his own struggle dissolves, and this makes him free to go forward. How does the Sufi struggle? He struggles with power, with understanding, with open eyes, and with patience. He does not look at the loss. What is lost is lost. He does not think of the pain of yesterday. Yesterday is gone for him. Only if a memory is pleasant does he keep it before him, for it is helpful on his way. He takes both the admiration and the hatred coming from around him with smiles. He believes that both these things form a rhythm within the rhythm of a certain music. There is one and two, the strong accent and the weak accent. Praise cannot be without blame, nor can blame be without praise. He keeps the torch of wisdom before him, because he believes that the present is the echo of the past, and that the future will be the reflection of the present. It is not sufficient to think only of the present moment, one should also think where it comes from and where it goes. Every thought that comes to his mind, every impulse, every word he speaks, is to him like a seed which falls in this soil of life and takes root. And in this way he finds that nothing is lost. Every good deed, every little act of kindness, of love, done to anybody, will someday rise as a plant and bear fruit. The Sufi does not consider life as different from business, but he sees how real business can be achieved in the best manner. The symbol of the mystics of China was a branch laden with fruit in their hand. What does it mean? It means that the purpose of life is to arrive at that stage where every moment becomes fruitful. And what does fruitful mean? Does it mean fruits for oneself? No, trees do not bear fruit for themselves, but for others. True profit is not that profit which one makes for oneself. True profit is that which one makes for others. After attaining all that one wants to attain, be it earthly or heavenly, what is the result of it all? The result is only this, that all that one has attained, that one has acquired, whether earthly or heavenly, one can place before others. Propkar, which in the language of the Vedanta means working for the benefit of others, is the only fruit of life. The only difference between spiritual attainment and the continual struggle of life is that in worldly life one struggles in another direction. In worldly life, be it in business or politics or industry or whatever be life's path, if a person proves to be lacking in that power which enables him to struggle along, he meets nothing but failure. He may be a good person, a saintly person, a spiritual person, but that does not count. It is for this reason that many in the world lose faith in goodness and in spirituality, when they see that this goodness does not seem to count in life. It is absurd for a spiritual person to say that by spirituality, goodness, and piety, one's worldly struggle will be helped. One should have the inspiration and power to answer life's demands in life's struggle. The seeker on the spiritual path should not forget that floating in the air is no good, Standing on the earth is the first thing necessary. There are many who dream, who live in the air, but that does not answer our purpose. When they complain that they are doing spiritual work, yet are in bad circumstances, they forget that the language of these paths is different, the law of these paths is different. That is why I distinguish between these two paths, in order to make it clear that the one has little to do with the other. This does not mean that the wicked person will succeed or that success is gained by evil. If it were so, it would only be a mortal success. Nevertheless, one should not blame the spirit for failure in worldly things, for worldly things belong to another inspiration. If it were not so, all great sages would be millionaires. The worldly struggle is outward struggle. The struggle on the spiritual path is inward struggle. No sooner does one take the spiritual direction than the first enemy one meets is one's own self. What does the self do? It is most mischievous. When one says one wants to fight it, it says, "I am yourself. Do you want to fight me?" And when it brings failure, it is clever enough to put the blame on someone else. Do all those who have failed in life accuse themselves? No, they always accuse another person. When they have gained something, they say, "I have done it." When they have lost something, they say, "This person got in my way." With little and big things, it is all the same. The self does not admit faults, it always puts the blame on others. Its vanity, its pride, its smallness, and its egotistical tendency, which is continually active, keep one blind. I remember a Persian verse made by my Murshid which relates to the self. When I feel that now I can make peace with myself, it finds time to prepare another attack. That is our condition. We think that our little faults, since they are small, are of no consequence, or we do not even think of them at all. But every little fault is a flag for the little self, for its own dominion. In this way, battling makes man the sovereign of the kingdom of God. Very few can realize the great power in battling with and conquering the self. But what does man generally do? He says, "My poor self, it has to withstand the conflicts of this world. Should I also battle with this self?" So he surrenders his kingdom to his little self, depriving himself of the divine power that is in the heart of man. There is in man a false self and a real self. The real self contains the eternal, the false self contains the mortal. The real self has wisdom, the false self ignorance. The real self can rise to perfection, the false self ends in limitation. The real self has all good, the false self is productive of all evil. One can see both in oneself, God in the other one. By conquering the other one realizes God. This other power has been called Satan, but is it a power? In reality, it is not. It is and it is not. It is a shadow. We see shadow and yet it is nothing. We should realize that this false self has no existence of its own. As soon as the soul has risen above the false self, it begins to realize its nobility. But then there is the practical aspect. How does it show? What form has it? It rises up in support of its own interest. It defends itself from the attacks of others. It feels exclusive towards everyone. It knows itself as an entity separate from friend and foe. It concerns itself with all that is transitory. It is blind to the future and ignorant of the past. It manifests in the form of self-pity. It expresses itself in the form of vengeance. It lives by feeding upon bitterness, and its life is always spent in obscurity. Its condition is restlessness and discontent. It has a continual appetite for all that is there, it is never satisfied. It has no trust in anyone, no thought for anyone, no consideration for anyone. It lacks conscientiousness and therefore manners. The little self thinks only of its own advantage and its own comfort. Giving to others, giving to those around it is dreadful to the self, for it knows no sacrifice. Renunciation for it is worse than death. That is the little self. When we blame another person, when we dislike somebody, we overlook the same element in ourselves. There is no soul in the world who can say, "I have not this in me." If only he were just. For mostly it is the unjust person who blames another. The more just we become, the more silent will we be in all circumstances. If outwardly we see faults in others, inwardly there is the sum total within ourselves. For instance, the little child cannot help loving. If a thief comes or a robber, the child wants to love him and smiles at him. Why is it? Because a thief is not awakened in the child. The child is from heaven, the thief from the earth. There is no place for him there, that is why he is no thief to the child. We accept something because we already have it in us. If we consider our knowledge, 1,000 things we seem to have experienced, we find that other people have told us most of them, and we believe them at once. As soon as a person tells us about someone wicked, we think, now we know, we can be quite sure about it. But when a person comes along and says, "I have seen a most wonderful thing, this man is so good," everyone thinks, is it really true? Is it possible to be as good as that? Is there not anything bad in him? Good is unnatural to many people. One might ask whether the spiritual path is a tyranny over oneself. No, for it is by treading it that one molds one's character, that one makes one's personality. And this is all religion. When a person begins to think, "I must not bring harm to or hurt anyone I meet, worthy or unworthy, friend or foe," only then does he begin his work in the spiritual direction. Spirituality is not wonder working. Spirituality is attained by right attitude. Where is the shrine of God? It is in the heart of man. As soon as one begins to consider the feelings of another, one begins to worship God. One might say that it is difficult to please everyone. No doubt it is. It is more difficult still if one has in oneself the inclination to please everyone. There is a story of a murshid who was going with his murids to visit some village. And he was keeping a fast. The murids also had taken a vow of fasting. They arrived at the peasant's home where there was great enthusiasm and happiness, and where a dinner was arranged for them. When they were invited to the table, the murshid went and sat down, but the murids did not dare because they had taken a vow of fasting. Yet they would never mention it to the murshid. They thought, "Murshid is forgetful, murshid has forgotten the vow." After dinner was over and they went out, the pupils asked, "Did you not forget the vow of fasting?" "No," was the murshid's answer, "I had not forgotten. But I preferred breaking the fast rather than the heart of that man who with all his enthusiasm had prepared the food." The thirst for life makes us overlook little opportunities of doing good. Every moment of life brings an opportunity for being conscious of human feeling, in prosperity, in adversity, in all conditions. It costs very little, only a little thought is necessary. A person may be good but at the same time not be conscientious about little things. There is no greater religion than love. God is love, And the best form of love is to be conscientious regarding the feelings of those with whom we come in contact in everyday life. The further one goes, the more difficulties there are. One finds greater faults in oneself as one advances along the spiritual path. It is not because the number of faults has increased, but the sense has become so keen that one regards differently faults which formerly one would not have noticed. It is like a musician. The more he advances and the better he plays, the more faults he notices. He who does not notice his faults is in reality becoming worse. There is no end to one's faults. To think of them makes one humble. To say, God is in me before one has realized this other metaphysical aspect of truth is not humble but profane. God is in the depth of the heart, but to know this is of no use when the doors of the heart are not open. It is the realization of the innumerable faults which makes one humble and effaces the little self from one's consciousness. And it is in the effacement of the self that real spiritual attainment lies. Reaction. Every circumstance, favorable or unfavorable, in which a man finds himself, and every person, agreeable or disagreeable, in whose presence he is, causes him to react. Upon this reaction depends the man's happiness and his spiritual progress. If he has control over this reaction, it means that he is progressing. If he has no control over it, it shows that he is going backward. When you take two people, a wise and a foolish, the wise person reacts more intensely than the foolish one. Also, a fine person naturally reacts more than a dense one, a just person more than an unjust one, and a spiritual person more than a materialist. And yet it is lack of mastery when one has no control over one's reactions. A person who is fine, spiritual, sensitive, wise, and just, but who has no control over his reactions, is incomplete. And this shows that even becoming fine and just and spiritual is not sufficient for all these qualities. Though they make one finer and more sensitive, yet they weaken one in the face of the disturbing influences of the crowd, and when this is the case, one will not be perfect. The balance of life lies in being as fine as a thread and as strong as a steel wire. If one does not show endurance and strength to withstand all the opposing and disturbing influences among which one always has to be in life, one certainly reveals a weakness and lack of development. In the first place, this reaction causes the man a certain amount of vanity. He believes he is better than the one who disturbs him, though he cannot with certainty say that he is stronger. When he cannot put up with conditions around him, he may think that he is a superior person, but in reality the conditions are stronger than he. If we are born on earth, if we are destined to walk on the earth, we cannot dream of paradise when we have to stand firm in all the circumstances that the earth presents us with. When a person progresses towards spirituality, he must bear in mind that together with his spiritual progress, he must strengthen himself against disturbing influences. If not, he should know that however much he desires to make progress, he will be pulled back against his will by conditions, by circumstances. There are 4 different ways in which a person reacts. In deed, in speech, in thought, in feeling. A deed produces a definite result, speech produces effect, thought produces atmosphere, feeling produces conditions. Therefore, no way in which a person reacts will be without effect. A reaction will be perceived quickly or slowly, but it must be perceived. Very often a reaction is not only agreeable to oneself, but to others also. A person who answers an insult by insulting the other stands on the same level. The one who does not answer stands above it, and in this way one can rise above things against which one reacts, if only one knows how to fly. It means flying above things instead of standing against them as a material person does. How can one call oneself spiritual if one cannot fly? That is the first condition of being spiritual. The whole mechanism of this world is action and reaction, in the objective world as well as in the world of men. Only, in man there is the possibility of developing that spirit which is called the spirit of mastery, and that spirit is best developed by trying to gain control over one's reactions. Life offers us abundant occasions from morning till evening to practice this lesson. Every move, every turn we make, we are faced with something agreeable or disagreeable, harmonious or inharmonious, either a condition or a person. If we react automatically, we are no better than a machine, and no different from thousands and millions of people who do so. The only way to find in ourselves a trace of that divine heritage which is mastery is by controlling our reactions against all influences. In theory it is simple and easy, in practice it is the most difficult thing there is to master. But when we think of its usefulness we shall find that there is nothing in the world that is more necessary and more important than this development. If there is any strength to be found in the world, that strength is within ourselves, and the fact that we are able to control our reactions is the proof of this. It preserves dignity, it maintains honor, it is this which sustains respect, and it is this which keeps men wise. It is easy to think, but it is difficult to continue to be a thoughtful person. Very often people have asked me if there is any practice, any study, anything which one can do in order to develop willpower, and I have answered that yes, there are many practices and many ways, but the simplest and best practice which one can follow without being taught is to have one's reactions always in hand. Such words as I cannot endure, I cannot stand, I cannot sustain, I cannot have patience, all mean to me, I am weak. By speaking thus we only admit in other words that we are weak. And can there be anyone in the world who is a worse enemy to us than our own weakness? If the whole world were our friend, that one enemy, our weakness, would be enough to ruin our life, but once this enemy is conquered, we can stand against all those who come into conflict with us. Now the question is how one should set to work in this development. One must also take into consideration one's physical condition. The nervous system must be in a proper condition. It is from nervousness that man goes from bad to worse, and even a good person with good intentions may prove to be otherwise, for he may have good intentions, but he cannot carry them out because his nerves are weak. What he needs is the habit of silence, of concentration, of meditation. A person who continually goes on talking or doing things and does not meditate for a while, who does not take a rest, cannot control his nervous system and keep it in order. If there is anything that can control the nervous system, it is right breathing, and when that right breathing is done, together with a concentration of thought, then the nervous system is greatly fortified. Besides, there are many things which cause unhappiness, and these can often be avoided by keeping the nervous system in hand. When we look at it from a higher point of view, this can be done by denying the impulses which sometimes arise suddenly and which clamor for an answer. What is called self-denial is really this: that one controls one's thoughts and wishes and desires and passions. But that does not mean retirement from life in the world, It only means taking oneself in hand. It is never too soon to begin control, and it is never too late to improve it. If that kind of education is given from childhood, wonderful results can be brought about. In ancient times in India, though one sees very little of it now, the youths were trained in asana, a certain way of sitting, of walking, of standing, and by that they first achieved control over their muscles and nerves. It would be of immense value if education today adopted both the study of controlling reactions and the practice of it in sports and gymnastics. If a youth of 12 to 16 years could learn to breathe clearly and rhythmically and deeply enough, that alone would be something. The control of the reaction will always give a certain amount of pain, but at the same time it is by suffering that one will gain the power to rise above it. But of course, if it is not understood rightly, one might endanger oneself. There is a danger in both cases. On one side there is a pit, on the other side there is water. There may be a person who, by being afraid of getting hurt or oppressed by someone, is always keeping his thoughts and feelings suppressed. If he had expressed them, he would have become a very bad man, but by not having been able to express them, he has been ruined. Therefore, one should develop one's discrimination in order to analyze the reaction, to understand it before it is expressed. One should always ask oneself, that which is in my hand now, shall I not throw it away? By throwing it away, shall I do something wrong? Where shall I throw it? Will it fall on my head? What will become of it? A man should know what he has in his hand. If in order to avoid breaking another person's head he has broken his own head, he has done wrong too. Then what should he do? He should first weigh and measure the impulses that come to him. Instead of throwing the impulse out automatically, he should first weigh it, analyze it, measure it, and use it to the best advantage in life. A stone is not only used to break another person's head or to break one's own head, but is also used to build houses. Use everything where it will be most useful, where it will be of some advantage. All such things as passion and anger and irritation, one looks upon as very bad, as evil, but if that evil were kept in hand, it could be used for a good purpose, because it is a power, it is an energy. In other words, evil, properly used, becomes a virtue, and virtue wrongly used becomes an evil. For instance, when a person is in a rage, or when he really feels like being angry, if he controls that thought and does not express it in words, that gives him great power. Otherwise, the expression has a bad effect upon his nerves. His control of it has given him an extra strength which will remain with him. A person who has anger and control is to be preferred to the person who has got neither. Does not self-control take away spontaneity? Self-control gives a greater spontaneity. It develops thought power. It makes one think first about every impulse which otherwise would have manifested automatically. In other words, hold the word between the lips before it drops out. Is impulse, before it is controlled, wrong in itself, or is it good? When one thinks about the origin of impulse, one goes in quite a different direction of thought. Then one has to think in what direction it is facing, also of the direction of the mind, whether it is in illumination or in darkness. The mind is sometimes illuminated, sometimes in darkness. One should think about the condition of the mind at the time. There is another thing to be considered in this connection. A person may have good intentions, and his mind may be focused on good ideas, and then another with evil intentions and wrong ideas, says or does something which automatically turns the mind of the first person to evil against his own will. There is the word of the Bible, resist not evil. Sometimes evil will come like fire thrown by a person into the mind of another. A fire then starts in that mind which had been without it, and in reaction it too expresses that fire. To resist evil is to send fire in answer to fire, in other words, to partake of the fire that comes from another. But by not partaking of it, one casts the fire out, and the fire falls on the person who threw it. The deeper side of life. When we consider life deeply, we can divide it into two parts and call one the lighter side of life and the other the deeper. The importance of both these sides may at times seem equally great. When a person is thinking of the lighter side of life, at that moment that side is more important, while the other side, of which the person is not conscious, seems to have no great importance. But then there are other moments which come in life, perhaps after suffering, or after a loss or some other experience, when a person suddenly awakens to a different realization of life, and when one is awakened to that the deeper side of life seems to have more importance than the lighter side. No one, neither clergyman nor mystic nor any authority, can say which side is more important. It depends upon how we look at it. If we raise its value, though it may be a small thing, yet we shall attach a greater value to it. There is nothing in this world which has a permanent value attached to it. If there seems to be such a thing, it does not stay in the same position always. If something like money is subject to change, then what is there in this world which does not change in importance? As it is necessary to have repose after action, so it is necessary to have a glimpse of the deeper side of life after having performed one's everyday duties. That is why religions have taught prayers, and why churches were built where people could go every day to be in a right atmosphere and to be silent. Now religion has become a secondary thing, and man's life has developed with more struggles. Naturally, a man has hardly time to go to a solitary place or into a church to sit down in silence. Those few who have the time and who care to continue with their religion go once a week to a service. Therefore, if I would suggest a way at the present time, it is the way of esotericism, which means on the one hand studying, on the other hand practicing, and also meditating. Doing these three things. One may ask, what should one study? There are two kinds of studies. One kind is by reading the teachings of the great thinkers and keeping them in mind, the study of metaphysics, psychology, and mysticism. And the other kind of study is the study of life. Every day one has an opportunity for studying, but it should be a correct study. When a person travels in a tramcar, in the train, with a newspaper in his hand, he wants to read the sensational news which is worth nothing. He should read human nature which is before him, people coming and going. If he would continue to do this, he would begin to read human beings, as though they were letters written by the divine pen, which speak of their past and future. He should look deeply at the heavens and at nature and of all the things to be seen in everyday life, and reflect upon them with the desire to understand. This kind of study is much superior, incomparably superior, to the study of books. Then there is practice, the practices which the yogis and Sufis in the East have performed for many, many years, and they have transmitted their thousands of years of experience as a tradition from teacher to pupil. Ways of sitting, ways of standing, of breathing properly, of being in silence, ways of relaxing, of concentrating, of feeling inspired, joyful, or more peaceful. Of course, for such practices the help of a teacher is necessary. And the third thing is the practice in everyday life, to practice the principles one has esteemed in life, to uphold the ideal one has always held in one's heart. These things and many others besides, such as one's attitude to others, one's manner with others, everything one does from morning till evening, all these things help one's development, till one arrives at a stage when one can see the deeper side of life naturally. There are numberless people, unhappy, depressed, or in great despair, perhaps wanting to commit suicide, who after having done this, have eventually realized that life is worth living after all. We can picture the lighter and the deeper sides of life in our present experience. We are traveling together, some from one country, some from another country, coming from different parts of the world. Yet we are gathered together. By what? By destiny, which gave us a common destination where we all wish to go and which brings us together for a few days in this ship. It is our happy disposition, our favorable attitude to one another, our desire to be kind, friendly, and sociable, which alone makes us understand one another, and which will help us to make one another happy. It brings us still closer together than destiny did. It is a little picture of life. When we consider the life of a community, a nation, a race, even of the whole world, what is it? Is it not like a large ship on which all are traveling, whether knowingly or unknowingly, all moving, all changing? There are two types of traveler. Those who know where they are traveling to, and those who do not know where they are coming from or where they are going. When these open their eyes, they only realize that they are in this ship, that they come from somewhere, and that they are in a ship which is moving and is going somewhere. There are many people like this living in the world today. They are so absorbed in their everyday activity that they are ignorant of where they come from and where they are going. Imagine the difference between these two travelers. The one who knows where he comes from and what his goal is, and the one who only knows where he is, what his present activity is, what the things in his immediate surroundings are. The one who does not know where he is going is not prepared to arrange, to face his destination. He does not know what is in store for him, and that is why he is not prepared for it. Buddha was asked one day by his disciples what he meant by ignorance. And he answered by describing how a person was once clinging in distress to the branch of a tree in the utter darkness of the night, not knowing whether there was earth or a ditch or water beneath him. All night long he trembled and wept and was clinging fast to that branch. And with the break of day he found he was not 1 foot away from the earth beneath his feet. Ignorance can be defined as fear, doubt, passion, confusion. Where do all these come from? They all come from our ignorance of one side of life, its deeper side. We may be clever in making the best of what we call the lighter side of life, but that is not all. Notwithstanding all our efforts from morning till evening, we do not know what we shall arrive at, what we gain by it. If we consider wealth, position, fame, name, or anything else, it only confuses us, for life is moving, it is all moving. We cannot hold it. A person may have riches one day and the next be poor. He may be successful one day, and yet perhaps sooner or later he will meet with failure. Such powerful nations as Russia and Germany, who could ever have thought that they would fall down in a moment? Nations which took hundreds of years to become strong and to build themselves up. But when their time came, their downfall did not take long. If such great powers are subject to falling in a moment and their whole construction can be broken, if that is the nature and character of life, no thoughtful person will deny the fact that there must be some mystery behind it, some secret of which he would like to find the key. At least he would want to know what life is and what is behind it. Those who have studied life and thought long enough about this subject have arrived at the same point as the thinkers who lived as much as 8,000 years ago. Buddha has said and has realized the same things that a really wise man would realize and say today. This shows us that wisdom is the same in all ages. We may be evolving or going backward, but wisdom never changes and will always be the same. The same realization will come to all those who think deeply and try to realize what life is. In order to realize life, it is not necessary for us to follow a certain religion. It is not necessary for us to be great or good, pious or spiritual. The first and most necessary thing is that we become observant. We should look at life more keenly than we do instead of living superficially. It would cost us nothing. It only takes us away from our everyday occupation for a few minutes. Life always gives an opportunity of thinking, however busy we may be. It is not necessary for us to leave our occupation, our work in life, and go into the forest and sit in silence and meditate upon life. We can meditate upon life in the midst of life if only we want to. What happens is that a man begins his life by action, and the more active he becomes, the less he thinks. Then his action becomes his thought. But if he considered what exists besides the action and thoughts which are connected with everyday life, if he also gave thought to the deeper side of life, he would have more benefit. The ideal life is at least to try to live up to one's ideal. But in order to have an ideal, one must first awaken to an ideal. Not everyone possesses an ideal, many people do not know of it. It is no exaggeration to say that the wars and disasters we have gone through, the unrest that all feel, and the disagreement among the people which is sometimes seen and sometimes not seen, are all caused by one thing, and that is the lack of an ideal. We are progressing commercially, industrially. But in all walks of life, progress will be stopped one day or another if the ideal is destroyed. If there is anything which can be said to be the means of saving the world, it is the awakening of idealism. It is the first task that is worth considering. Besides, for the average man to consider even one thing, that he must live a life of balance, would already be of great importance, and it is not very difficult. When a person is working, he should realize that recreation is also necessary. When a person tires himself, it is necessary to take repose. When a person thinks too much, it is necessary to rest the mind at certain times, during which he must try not to think. But life is an intoxication, it is like drink, whatever be man's motive, whether he is compelled and thrown into it or not. It is all an intoxication, going at his object with all his might and thought and feeling, till either he has accomplished what he wants, or he is destroyed. If he used balance in everything he did, he would find the key to a life of greater happiness. People often fight and argue and discuss. Over what? Over a reason. When two persons dispute, each has a reason. Each thinks his reason the right one. They may dispute for years, and yet will arrive nowhere because the reason of each is different. Therefore, to think more is to see behind the reason. And the moment we have begun to see behind the reason, we will look at life quite differently. Then we find that behind what we blame the other for there is perhaps something to praise, and where there is something to praise there is perhaps a reason for blame. We shall begin to see what is beyond all appearances, and that will give us the proof that the whole of life is a kind of unfoldment. The deeper we look into life, the more it unfolds itself, allowing us to see more keenly. Life is revealing. It is not only human beings who speak. If only the ears can hear, even plants and trees and all nature speak, in the sense that nature reveals itself, reveals its secret. In this way we communicate with the whole of life. Then we are never alone, then life becomes worth living. The thoughtful of all ages have considered the source of creation to be one and the same. A scientist will tell us today that the cause behind creation is motion, vibration. So far he will go. But if from motion and vibration this manifestation has come into our view, then that motion is not lifeless. If that motion is life itself, then it is intelligent. It is of course not intelligent in the sense we understand this word. We know the limited side of it. We call the function of the brain intelligence. We say that one thing is intelligent because it is living, and another thing where we do not distinguish life we call unintelligent. But an Indian scientist has pointed out that even trees breathe. If that is true, then the trees are living. And if today it is proved that trees are living, it will also be found that stones are living. Then one will realize that all life comes from one source, which is the very life of all things, and not only life but intelligence also. This is what religion calls God. Whatever we call it, it is the same. The difference is only in name. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.